Well, I'm Zachary Fowler, and we're talking about surviving alone for 87 days and keeping your mind busy tonight. Many people have asked me, when you were out on alone surviving, what did you do to keep your mind busy? I was out there for 87 days, and so I thought I'd do a little fireside chat and talk about that, because if I filmed it and sat in the editing studio and tried to edit it all up, I would end up adding all these pictures and it would take me days and weeks to edit. So I'm gonna do it live. So if you're just tuning in, thanks for tuning in, and if you're watching on the replay, thanks. 87 days on History Channel's Alone Show. If you don't already know and you have never seen me before, I survived 87 days alone in Patagonia. It's on TV, you can check it out, history. It's legit. And I keep getting the question, what did I do to keep my mind busy while I was out there surviving alone? And one of the things I did was write a wizard story in my mind. And I literally had each of the conversations with each of the characters back and forth, like pretending to be each of the characters. Before I tell you the whole that's basically what I'm going to talk about tonight, is the whole plot line of that story and exactly how it went, and some of the funny points and the times when I laughed, and if the people that were editing was probably like, this guy's completely insane, because I didn't exactly tell it the story. I kept tell it to the camera. I always told the highlights. They never ended up on the TV show, the whole wizard story, and writing that story in my head to entertain myself. And it actually started from a dream. But before I tell you that story, there's a few other things I did to keep my mind busy, and I've mentioned it before, but I kept my mind busy by, writing like a survival book in my head. Basically just going over all the stuff that I've learned out there and drawing out the pictures, adding stories to it, like as if, the whole thing about starting a fire, I went and wrote a chapter about starting fires and that's what's going to appear in my 87 Days book, which I'm working on right now. And so I wrote like a whole chapter on starting fires, and in that chapter I wrote about how my dad taught us to start a fire with one match and stuff like that. So in the morning when I woke up, I'd work on that book in my mind. I'd lay there in bed, I'd put a log on the fire, open up the banked fire, and it would get going, and I'd wait till I felt comfortable getting out of bed, and I'd write that book in my mind to entertain myself while the fish head soup warmed up. And then I also sometimes I would talk to the camera, because the camera was my Wilson, to keep myself sane. I would think of stuff. What am I going to think of today? I'd tell the camera. I'd be like, I'm going to think about Spider-Man versus Superman. Or the whole last month I thought about, I'm going to take my family places. Like, I imagined each road that I would go down. I'd tell the camera about each road that I would go down and what store I would take them to, what restaurant I would take them to. I was just like always trying to think of what I could possibly think of to keep my mind busy so that I wouldn't go nuts. I mean, because after 4 o'clock, that was the worst part. After 4 o'clock, you really miss your family. You're surviving. You're doing all the work. Your chores are, your firewood is in. I've checked my fissuation down by the water, found out if I had a fish or not. It's on to smoke. Your mind gets tired. I did everything I possibly could to keep my mind busy. And I mean, sometimes, especially after 4 o'clock, your mind just tries to go to these places. It wants to think about quitting or something like that. And I said, no, I'm never going to think about that. We have this saying in the boatyard: don't get dirty before 9:30, and nothing new after 2. So when I was out there in Patagonia, I said, I'm not going to think about quitting after 2 o'clock, because I knew, even on the worst days, you start getting tired. On the days that I didn't have a fish and all I had was the fish head soup, I'm not going to think about quitting after 2 o'clock. And in the morning, I would not stress, and it turned out to work well, because it wouldn't even get light until 10 o'clock, especially where I was on the dark side of the moon. I was like, I'm not going to stress about not getting anything done before 9 o'clock, because it's dark, it's really hard, I'll just not worry about it. And then I won't think about quitting after 2 o'clock. And I never thought about quitting at all almost, but because of this. I mean, I think there was one day that was like really like, I think I might have to quit someday. I thought about it like that, but I never thought about like, I might want to quit today. And no, I don't want to quit. I never battled my mind that way when it came to the whole quitting issue. It wasn't an option. I wasn't allowed to think about it after 2, and so it just never came up. Keto coffee, so good. If you don't know what keto coffee is, Google it. It's great. It's the best thing ever. Wonderful. So that brings me to the wizard story. You know, I did all those other things to entertain my mind, to keep my mind busy. You know, always trying to keep my mind busy. And I started having the worst nightmares when I first got there. Like, I kept dreaming that I was home, and I was like, I'm supposed to be in Patagonia. If they notice I'm missing, if they come for a med check and I'm missing, then I'll be ejected. And I haven't quit. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be at home, and which is, you know, was really hard. You know, in your dream, you know, I'm there with my family again, and I'm back in Maine, and I'm like, oh, I'm with my family, and I'm like, I'm sorry, hon, I'm not supposed to be here. I gotta go. And I kept dreaming I was in Lincolnville, Maine for some reason, and I need to get on the ferry to get back out to the island, and that's where I was surviving, was for some reason, not Patagonia, but I was surviving on an island just out there. And I like escaped on a boat back to the mainland. And then I'd wake up and I'd be like, where am I? You know, I'm in Patagonia. Phew. Oh, crap, I'm still in Patagonia. I was like relieved and like horrified, and it was like such a messed up thing, and it took an entire month of those dreams before it finally went away. And I was like, even though I didn't feel like it during the daytime, it took an entire month before I was like resigned or okay with where I was and stuff, that I was able to live with it in my subconscious, I guess. And that's when, and one of those times I had a dream, and it wasn't a horrible dream. It was a weird dream. While I was still building my shelter up over the hill, that 8 stories, I had the dream that there was a wizard, and I was the apprentice, and we were in a council with dwarves and some other weirdish people, and around like a big table or something, you know, almost like a Knights of the Round Table. And in my dream, it was in the castle of the not the dwarves, no, it was somebody else. But the dwarves came in like a giant chicken, like a giant steampunk robotic chicken, and broke and stepped over the castle walls and showed up. And so like this giant chicken full of dwarves running this mechanical chicken showed up in my dream, and the wizard's there, and the dwarves come out, and they say they have a magical orb. And I'm like, this is the most messed up dream. In my dream, I kind of knew it was a dream, and I was like, it was the weirdest thing, you know. It's like, and the orb, they pulled out the orb, and everybody morphed into, except for me and except for the wizard and like one other person, morphed into this weird creatures and stuff. And then when the orb was put back away in its lead case, it went away, and everybody stopped. And when they morphed, they were acting all weird and crazy and like it was a nuttiest thing. I woke up in the morning, I was like, that is the weirdest dream. And I was like, wow, that was so weird. It was so vivid and so strange. I mean, the dreams that I had there in Patagonia were unreal. And I went up to my shelter that day, and I kept thinking about that dream because it was so vivid, and I kept kind of like thinking over that dream in my mind. You know, I'm like, oh man, am I going nuts? I've been here in Patagonia for like 25 days now, you know, and like I'm having these crazy dreams either of being at home and then waking up and finding I'm still here and being like, yay, crud, yay. And so like this wizard story, a dream kind of came to me, and I was like, well, I love listening to sci-fi audiobooks and when I'm working and stuff like that, and maybe that's where this crazy dream comes from. And maybe since I don't have my audiobooks, I missed my audiobooks so much when I was there in Patagonia. Like I miss my family, but in another way, in like a minute to minute basis, you know, when I'm at home, and not so much now that I've been back from Patagonia. Before I left Patagonia, every day when I was in the boatyard, I'd listen to an audiobook. I listened to about 5 audiobooks a week before I went to Patagonia. I would, you know, I'd have them plugged in to my headphones, and I'd be building boats, and I'd be listening to an audiobook. I'd come home, I'd love the family, you know, I'd have one earbud out, I'd go back, you know, and then I'd be out there in the yard doing firewood, listening to audiobooks, always listening to audiobooks. And so this weird, crazy dream about the dwarves and the giant robotic chicken and all that comes to me, and I'm like, what if I was to entertain myself while I'm out here working in Patagonia? What if I wrote a book in my head that started off of this dream? You know, I like wizards and things. I read books about survival and about homesteading and things like that. But when it comes to listening to books, I love zombie books. I love doomsday books, prepper book, like, you know, prepper after the apocalypse books, and I love sci-fi books. You know, my mom always jokes that, like, if it doesn't have a alien with blue skin and 3, you know, then he doesn't like it. But that's just a joke. But I do love my sci-fi. And so I was like, well, what if I take this crazy dream that I had out in Patagonia and I write a story as a way to keep my mind busy while I'm working? So while I was out there, that day I started thinking about the story and, like, how do I do this? And I'm like, I need a way to keep my mind busy. This could work, you know? And I was like, all right, camera, I think I'm going to take some time to myself, because pretty much at that point I've been just talking everything I did to, like, probably drove the editors nuts. Like, I filmed every day for 12 hours a day. I just narrated my entire, you know, everything I was doing. You know, it was like, who's that guy that does that with a piano? And I was like, all right, I'm gonna cut this bamboo now, and I'm gonna shape this down to make this into this. And so, like, the people editing must have been going nuts. 12 hours a day. I was awake for 12 hours and asleep for 12 hours. They must have been going nuts editing this, you know, like me just nonstop talking about exactly what you could already see me doing. So I was like, I'll write this. So I started writing the story in my mind, and, like, I was like, all right, so the dwarves are there, and I have to work on the premise. Now, this orb thing makes people morph into something else. What is that? Maybe it's revealing the true nature of the genetics of what's been bred into people on this planet. Yeah, that feels right from my dream. That's what's happened there. You know, this magical orb. And the dwarves have brought it to the council, and they've revealed it to everybody, showing them and saying that this is a problem, you know, and it's causing other issues. There's creatures that are popping up that aren't morphing back, that are popping up here and there, and something happened when they found this orb. So in my mind, I started talking as each of the dwarves, and the wizard, and of course, is the voice of reason. And he, in my dream, for some reason, he did some weird thing. I remember he like used his beard, it was pretty cool, to, like, suck up something. He, like, suck up there was like an airbag that had to do with the chicken or something like that. He sucked it up, and he's like, I could use these resources for something later. It was a weird wizard. And so I started having each of the conversations. So basically the story starts progressing, and after a day or two of making myself mentally have the conversations with the characters, like pretending to be the wizard and saying, this thing is dangerous, we need to find out where it came from, and stuff like that, I kind of, like, stopped doing the story in my head, because it was like such a mental exercise pretending to be the character and then, like, having that conversation with another character. And it sounds pretty insane, right, that somebody would even do that. But I mean, you got so much free time. You don't understand how much free time that you really have when you're out there. I mean, this is almost a month of me being alone at this point. You know, I'm working on projects. I'm building that shelter I had up over the hill, and I was just like, it was mentally fatiguing to work on the story for, like, an hour or two at a time. So after, like, 3 or 4 days, I was like, I kind of gave up on the story for a little bit. And then I found after, like, 2 or 3 more days, I started getting bored, kind of. I was like, I can't get bored. If I get bored out here, it's going to be the end of my time out here in Patagonia. So I made myself, every time I started to feel like I might be getting mentally bored a little bit, I was like, I made myself go back to the story and say, where did I leave off? And I started having the conversations with the characters back and forth. The wizard, they got all their gear together. And they're like, well, the dwarves are like, well, we have an airship with the that we've built, and nobody's ever built an airship before. The dwarves were basically like mechanically inclined, and they could build stuff, unlike the other races. The dwarves, just like any other sci-fi book, the dwarves are the ones that forge the swords and things like that. And now I'm losing viewers because you guys think I'm nuts, but I love the sci-fi stuff. I'm sorry, but So the dwarves are in this storyline are mechanically inclined, and they've built an airship where nobody else has ever done anything like that before. And there's a sea that's an uncrossable sea, and the wizard senses from this orb that there's some sort of an attachment to this orb to the story of where it came from that's causing the destruction in this side of the ocean. And this ocean has never been crossable before, because the waves on it are literally every single wave on that ocean out past the breakers, which, there's some islands and there's some breakers. And so I'm also, not only am I writing the story in my mind, I'm also building a map of this universe which my story exists in to entertain myself. So I'd be stopping and be like, okay, so how does that work? There's an uncrossable ocean, but they need to be able to catch fish. So there's a breaker of some sort, maybe a magical breaker or a breakwater, that beyond that nobody can cross with a ship, because the waves literally come and then just collapse and just come, and they're constantly collapsing in on themselves, and it's just like, it's impossible. And so the dwarves are like, all right, we want to put together a venture. So the dwarves get together with the wizard and the wizard's apprentice, which was me, and as I write the story, it continues to be me as the hero of the story. No, just kidding. Just me in the story. That's how I always thought of it. I wasn't the wizard. I was just the wizard's apprentice. And so in the story, as it progresses, I got the dwarves, the wizards. We go on the ship, and we head south to try to unite and get some more resources. That's what it was. Some more resources, because the ships they had nacelles. I don't know what a nacelle is. I just remember it from sci-fi books, and it sounds good. They had nacelles that powered the crystals that flew the ship or something like that. And so they fly south, and they're trying to make a deal with another set of dwarves to get some of those from the other dwarves to run the airship. And we managed to find out that from the south something is coming up. Creatures like golems and stuff like that, and golems and things have been arising because of this orbs, which the dwarves have gotten from up in the air with the airships. Since they invented the airship, they flew up and they actually found this thing and brought it down, which, as soon as it touched the ground, started this whole destructive process to this world. And so we managed to run into some other dwarves, and they unite with us while their ship is crashing, and we're just about to cross the ocean. Now, at this point, I've written this story in my mind for about, I'm about halfway through my adventure out there on alone. I keep stopping writing the story in my mind and doing other things and talking to the camera about other stuff, Spider-Man versus Superman, whatever. And, what's my favorite X-Men character, and what power would I like to have if I was a Marvel universe versus Star Wars universe versus, one thing or the other. And so, I kept switching back and forth, and then I kept making myself go back to the story, especially when I carve at night. That would be the best time, because I was tired of talking to the camera or something. I would whittle, and I'd write this story in my head. So they're all prepared. We've joined up with some other dwarves who we took all the power units off of their ship, and we're about to cross this uncrossable ocean. And this is when my favorite point in the story happened. This I'm literally, and I started working on the story harder. I'm 45 days or 40 days into my time out there on alone in Patagonia. I'm sitting in my shelter at night, and I'm writing the story in my head, and then we're about to cross this ocean, and the story all of a sudden just started taking on a character and nature of its own. It's writing itself almost at times. Like I just feel like it's just starting to flow out of me. And in the story, the dwarves are like, all right, we just got to stop at this island and pick up one more person to fill out our adventure team or whatever. And it's the tracker lady. And the wizard's like, no, not the witch. And he goes and tries to jump over the rail of the boat, and the apprentice and everybody runs after him. And as he's trying to jump over the rail of the boat, they grab his hem and they pull him back up onto the ship, and he's kicking and, no, let me go, I'm not going there. I don't want to see the witch. There's no way. And the apprentice looks to the closest dwarf and he says, what witch? And they said, it's not a witch, it's his ex-wife. And I just start laughing my head off in front of the camera when I haven't even been talking to it, because I just, like, when I got in there at night, I just have the camera running with the night vision on, and I'd be sitting there whittling away on that 200 spoons and 200 sets of chopsticks I ended up making the entire time I was there, as well as a myriad of other things, whatever I could whittle to keep my hands busy, and the stories to keep my mind busy. And so I'm laughing my head off. I was like, I gotta tell the camera, because if they take my footage away on the next medical check and then they're watching this footage, they're gonna think I'm completely insane and lost my marbles here, laughing just hysterically to myself in the middle of the night here while whittling. And so I was like, so I told the camera the whole storyline of what was going on and why I was laughing, the wizard and his ex-wife. But then at that point, I was kind of addicted to my own story that I was writing. And so the wizards and the dwarfs, they went to the island, and of course the tracker lady, they're like, the wizard talked them into not going to see her for a couple days, or he tried to, and in the middle of the night she shows up on the ship when he's out there staring off to the island, like having confused thoughts. And his apprentice talked to him, and they had a conversation with each other about it, and he started to tell his apprentice what had happened between the two of them. And he sent the apprentice to bed and said he'd be along shortly, and he's smoking his pipe, of course, because he's a wizard. And she shows up. She of course made her way out to the ship somehow, even though it's an airship. She's the tracker woman, and she is one tough cookie. She's she turns out to be an amazing woman and an awesome character in the story. I was just and a little bit after, I kind of formed after Jamie a little bit. And she sneaks onto the ship, and right when he's reminiscing, she sneaks up behind him, which nobody can do to a wizard, but she does. And of course, he is flabbergasted. He's like completely, for somebody who's in charge and knows everything, know-it-all wizard. When he runs into his ex-wife, he's tongue-tied, just makes a complete fool of himself, and this new dynamic comes into my story of this broken romance. The story was revealed between the two of them talking back and forth. He was busy in his books and didn't pay attention to her and didn't notice her because he was, just too into figuring out what was wrong with his world and where it all came from. Because there's all these, this literature from another, he believed, another world and another time that exists and doesn't make sense how it could exist. They have, they have Tolkien and all these other books and all these things that the wizards have kept in their libraries of knowledge. And everybody else in the world thinks that that's all just phooey and just, it's all science fiction and it's not real. And they don't really have access to it the way the wizards do. But he can't figure out how they got to this world, and he's convinced. And he's been trying his hardest the more he learned about this to study up on this. And he neglected his wife, and her as a tracker woman would go on these adventures. And the more she came home and the less he noticed her, in the end she actually left him a note and said that, she's leaving him, and he didn't even notice it and didn't say anything. And in the end, the note actually sat there on the kitchen table for a month, and she finally just left because he never even acknowledged it, never even opened it. She said, "That's it." And by the time he did realize it was too late, or he felt like it was too late, and so he never bothered to reach out to her. It said that she was at the hunting camp if he wanted to see her, and he never bothered to. It was like too much time passed by. He said he'd do it later, and he just got wrapped up in his studies. So they drew apart, but there was still the chemistry. And as they traveled across the ocean, that chemistry, it becomes obvious. I'm a hopeless romantic when it comes to stuff like this. And that chemistry became evident again, that there still was that chemistry there. And they're both trying to live their own life now. And he's more aware of the universe around him now that he's out in the world and not just in his study and stuff. And his time with his apprentice has given him more awareness of other people's feelings. And so they cross the ocean and they start running into some weird stuff. Like they run into an island with something on it that mentally bonds and contacts and connects with the apprentice, myself, in the story. And it says, don't go on. It tells me not to go forward, not to go any further, that, it wants you. And so the wizard's like, has a feeling of what it might be, and he's not revealing what it is to the apprentice. There's secrets that start building up between the apprentice and the wizard. And so my story it keeps building, and I keep working on it like heavily, day in and day out. And now I'm not just working on this while I'm working and whittling in the evenings. I'd be quiet with the camera. As long as I mentioned to the camera what I was doing that day, I'd start being quiet, and I'd be working on my project, whether it's doing firewood or whatever. And I'm working on this story in my mind to keep myself entertained and keep myself from going insane. And then we reach all the way across the rest of the ocean, and the first thing that the ship comes to is like these unnatural breakwaters that there's like this pulsing that is causing this ocean tide and almost prevents them from getting there. And they manage to, with the wizard's power, cross the rest of this ocean and get past this breakwater and this pulsing that's causing this ocean to be unpassable. So on the other side of the ocean, they find these like cities that are thousands of years old, that are almost in mint condition, and nobody's there. And it's like, I'm like all this stuff is almost like coming to life. I don't know if you guys have ever read Stephen King or read about Stephen King, about what he writes. He said his stories come from another universe, and they come to him. He doesn't make them up. And I almost felt like that with my story out there on Alone. That this story didn't just come to me. It's almost like it's coming to me from this alternate universe where this was really happening. The way it flowed, and the more I got to know each of the characters and their nature and their relationship with the other people there, and the dwarves, and their relationship with, and how they were always grumpy-ish. The dwarves are always grumpy, and the dwarves in my story, and their abilities. Each of the people's abilities in this universe were unique. Like dwarves were no heavier than anybody else. They were smaller, but their denseness level was that they could literally, they were like 10 times as strong. And so we get to the dwarves and everybody, they get to the other side of the ocean, and it was, oops, I gotta plug it in. Talking so long. Excuse me so we get to the other side of the ocean, and we get to the other side of the ocean with the dwarves, and there's these cities, and we start exploring, and we find like these cities are like almost completely undisturbed. The technology that went into building these cities, like they don't need weeding, and the gardens are still growing in them. It's almost like they were left yesterday, but the obvious amount of dust and decay shows that these things have been abandoned for a long time. And they go from that city to another, and then all of a sudden they start finding creatures. There's elves, but they're not just regular elves, because apparently my world has all the things a regular sci-fi world has, but the elves in my world are zombie vampire elves that are super fast and super scary. And When they find the elves, they're trying to figure out what's happening. They've been going to place and trying to study in the libraries that they find there what it is. They believe that they came from that society and ended up on the other side of the ocean and lost all technology for some reason. This orb still has something to do with all this. They're not sure what. And during their research and running from these zombie vampire elves, they find a people that are still alive there and or like a resistance. The resistance reveals to them the fact that they actually came from Earth 5,000 years ago, and for about 500 years they built these cities and civilization on this side of the world, and then the orb was found at a mining facility outside of town. Nobody knows what it is, and it started changing people. And when that was revealed, ships that everybody, the colony ships that they came on, were pushed back up into space, and there are still in those 5 or 6 stars that are up in space that are really bright are not actually stars, but are actually spaceships with colonists still up there in cryosleep. So they, with the resistance helps, manage to become in communication with the ships that are in space, and the story just keeps progressing. And now I'm, at this point I'm like about day 70 and into my time out there in Patagonia, and I've got wizards and dwarves that came from across the side of the ocean. I got found out that there's a civilization that they had come from, which fell apart and went into a post-apocalyptic state. There's ships that are still in space that might still have people alive in them, and they used to come from Earth. They end up with the help of the power from the ship. They use that to be able to turn on a radio system and communicate with the ships that are in space and tell those ships to wake everybody up that is in outer space. So everybody wakes up that's in outer space, and just like everybody that's on the planet, well, not everybody. One of the ships, turns out, it left before the infection. So they are still just normal, regular, run-of-the-day human beings. One of the ships, turns out that they were infected, and so while they were in cryosleep, they have turned into the different species of people that exist on the planet. Like, there was tiger people, dwarves, none of them turned into zombie elves for some reason. I don't know why on that ship. And there was like wizards and all this other stuff, but they've been asleep this whole time, so they don't have any idea what's going on. And then there was, another one of the ships was modified, and it became, and it's been awake this whole time out there in outer space, and it's got some sort of creature on, like a high super brain of a giant centipede creature, and it wants to come back down to Earth. And it's the captain's ship that controlled the whole fleet, and so they can't. None of the ships can come back down to this planet, and it wants to make it onto the surface of the planet or to Earth. And 3 other ships come awake with just, I think, they instantly like try to make the jump back to Earth. And because the ships are under such disrepair and they didn't believe that it's been like 3,000 or 5,000 years since they were in cryosleep, they try to make the jump back to Earth, and the ships blow up. So the last 3 remaining ships know that it's not worth trying to make a jump to Earth. The best thing they could do is go down and land on the planet. So basically this whole process ensues with the zombie elves being coordinated by this creature in space on one of the ships, and then them communicating with the modified people on one of the ships, and then the humans on the other ship, who are run by a second-hand general or whatever, and he wants to come down, and they all and they manage to, and then basically the end of my time there comes along, and the book literally comes to an end on about day 84, and I decide to end the book with the ships are coming back down to space, almost like it's like a chapter 1, if book 1 ends. The ships are now firing their boosters, and they're heading back towards planet Earth, or not Earth, what they called New Earth, because that's where they had come from. they landed 5,000 years earlier, the colony ships, and this whole process. And meanwhile, the wizard and stuff, they found out about the orb. They believe that is some sort of extraterrestrial thing. They don't know where it came from, but it modifies people's genetics and brings them to either a dark state or a light state of being of a different type of creatures, which created the zombie elves and the wizards and everything. And meanwhile, the apprentice is they're starting to find out that he has these extra abilities, like beyond the wizardry, and a little bit more close to this hive mind super creature that controls the zombie elves. And it's like, my whole story is like, and it just developed on itself. My mom thinks I should write this story as this is my $1 million idea, to write this sci-fi book that I wrote in my head out there. I mean, if I sit down and do it very slowly, I can pretty much come. I don't see why I couldn't do it again. So that is where it ended, and around day 84, and I stopped working on it in my mind. And a few days later, on day 87, my wife showed up, and she came up behind me and hugs me and says, "How you did it? You outstubborned them all. You can go home now. How does it feel to be half a millionaire?" And I mean, I was on my way back to civilization, and I was no longer had to be alone. I wrote this entire story in my mind, and I think about it fairly often. And so I think at some point I am going to have to just write it. And just the whole having dyslexia and being afraid of, and just it's been really hard to start writing my 87 Days book, which is going to be a combination of the things I did out there to survive. It's going to be like 1/3 stories of my life that led me to Patagonia and 87 days out there, and 1/3 like of my story there, and 1/3 of like survival and all the traps and survival techniques and things that I've been showing in the YouTube videos. Just like all that stuff. So it's going to be a combination of everything, and stuff. The story of my life, as well as the story and when it relates to things out there, and a full and DIY on all the primitive traps I've ever built, and leading up to the show, and the ones that I built out there and how I built them differently, how I might have built different traps in a different way and stuff like that. So, but the writing has been really hard, with this dyslexia. It's like I'm afraid to start something like the whole wizard story and start writing it. So let me know what you guys think. Leave it in the comments below. Should I actually write this book and try to have it published? I mean, it kept me. It was one of the things, outside of, that God that kept me going out there. That I was able to keep myself entertained, and it really made things flow smoothly for me. Should I write this as a book, and try to have it published? I'm afraid like I don't have the ability to articulate the back and forth between the characters in the right way when it comes to typing it out. It's one thing to think about it in your mind and just have characters talk and stuff like that back and forth, or to write like about my time out there on alone. I've seemed to have done okay with that. I'm now writing for the Maine Sportsman magazine, and they're publishing my articles. Backwoodsman's going to be publishing my articles starting in the new year. I'm not sure if they're going to be publishing them every single issue, but it might be, which will be like little excerpts from my book. As they're ready, I'm sending off to Backwoodsman and to Maine Sportsman and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. But to write a whole story about space wizards and stuff, I don't know if that would work. And thank you guys for watching. I didn't get to your comments as I watch it here. So this is not a live stream that I'm just going to be answering the comments and stuff. It's just, we'll do that another time. This was just the best way to film this and get this story to you guys and stuff. So thank you for watching. If you do have a comment or question about what we've been talking about today, and you've put it up here and I haven't answered it, feel free to come back in 15 minutes. I know it's annoying. The comments don't stay up, and leave it in the comments below what your comment or question was. And very fastidious about it. You guys know me. If you're my constant watchers, you know me that I will get back and I will answer your comment or question below. So come back and leave that comment below or question. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good night, guys. Fowler out. Throw some more firewood on. Good night.